The high bar and low bar squat, the main fundamental difference is the barbell placement on your back. In the high bar squat, we're going to position that barbell on the top of the traps, on the utmost part of the upper back, and then on the low bar squat, the bar will be sitting a little bit lower, often on the rear delts. So now let's physically look at the low bar squat and some of the biomechanical differences compared to the high bar squat. So let's get our rack positioning. That bar is going to sit lower on the back. We're still going to be nice and tight, so we have a nice tight upper back. That barbell is sitting on my delts. I'm going to stand upright with it, walk it out. I'm going to take a slightly wider stance for this because I'm a little bit more comfortable with that. I have a slight forward lean to accommodate for the hips breaking first, and we're going to sit down, gripping the floor, taking that nice big belly breath. So one thing to note about the low bar squat is that at the bottom, we're going to think about driving up into that bar. So doing it again. We're going to drive up into that bar with the back. The back is working as one of the prime movers in this movement because you're loading the full posterior chain. So driving up into that bar is something that's a little bit unique with this squat style compared to the high bar squat, where the back is serving mostly as a stabilizer. So now let's physically look at the high bar squat and some of the differences we discussed earlier in this video. So we're going to get that rack position on top of our traps on the upper part of the back. We're nice and tight so the bar is sitting on those traps like a shelf. Walk the bar out. So as you can see, we have a more upright posture. We're going to grip the floor with our feet, maintaining a nice tripod positioning. We're going to take a nice big belly breath. And then we're going to break at the knee and the hip at the same time, sitting those knees, the hips straight down. As we come up, we're going to grip the floor, drive through those quads, and lock out. And then we're going to repeat that same thing, thinking about breaking at the knee and the hip joint first. Big belly breath. Driving up through the quads. Let's talk about a consistent training element that will run true for both squat styles, and that is your bar path. So in the high bar and low bar squat, you want that barbell to track over the midfoot. Now obviously there could be a tiny bit of variance based on your body's build, strength, mobility, but ideally you want that barbell to track over the midfoot throughout the full movement. That's going to allow us to produce the most power, and it's going to help us move the most efficiently. All right, 4 quick tips for the high bar and low bar squat. So I have 1 for the high bar, 3 for the low bar. Number 1 for the high bar is if ankle mobility is an issue for you and you can't really get depth and perform this squat properly without the ankles feeling very uncomfortable, you can opt for weightlifting shoes. They can assist a little bit with that, but do not just all of a sudden neglect mobility work because you're wearing weightlifting shoes. That's especially true for athletes who compete on the field or anywhere else. Don't neglect your mobility for shoes. For low bar squats, look for a barbell with a center knurling. That's gonna grip the back a little bit more and resist that rolling. It's gonna be a little bit easier than using something like a weightlifting bar that has either smooth knurling or no knurling, or just your general fitness bar that has no knurling in the middle at all. My second tip for the low bar squat is to set your J-hooks a little bit lower than what you would normally do with your high bar squat. Since you have more of a forward lean and a little bit lower of a bar position, on any set that you're really fatigued and you're coming up and you really feel that forward lean hitting in, it's gonna be a little bit easier to rack the weight this way. It's just kind of a foolproof way from you missing the rack and then looking like a fool in the gym. So my last tip for the low bar squat is your footwear. So conversely to the high bar squat where we wear a heeled shoe, typically in a low bar squat, athletes will opt for a flatter outsole. So either going shoeless or something like a Converse that's very flat. Why is this the case? Well, for a lot of athletes, they don't want a super sharp knee angle because they're pushing the hips back and they're loading the posterior chain. That hip angle is already going to be very sharp. So having a heel that jacks up the hips just generally feels very uncomfortable. Now, obviously, there are some anomaly athletes out there who wear weightlifting shoes and squat low bar, but for a majority, a low flat outsole is typically the best bet just in terms of overall comfort level. The high bar versus low bar squat, how do you choose what's best for you? A lot of coaches and athletes will have their own opinions on this, but here's my take. In terms of the high bar squat, I think every athlete can benefit with this squat style. It's great for weightlifters because it has high carryover to the Olympic lifts. It's great for your general athletes because it will have high carryover to on-field performance, sprinting, jumping, overall leg development. Plus, it's going to limit stress on the back because if athletes are already deadlifting, the last thing you want to do is do a low bar squat and have them stress their back additionally. So a high bar squat's often a better bet for them. Last population is the general population who have been doing things like goblet squats or more beginner movements or squat variations. This movement tends to be a little bit more synonymous with just your purest form of squatting, so it's a little bit easier for beginners to get into high bar squats compared to low bar squats. Low bar squats, who are they best for? Well, there's really just one kind of athlete that low bar squats are typically best for. Sans the people who have mobility issues and just opt for this for that purpose. But the athlete that low bar squats benefit best are powerlifters. This athlete wants to move the most weight possible, so doing so in a low bar squat typically is a little bit easier because you're using the full posterior chain and the back to move the weight. And you have a little bit of a less sharp knee angle, so you can really load up the hips and move the most weight possible. Does that mean powerlifters should not do high bar squats? Absolutely not. They should use both squat styles. In fact, using them interchangeably is a great way to build up the quads and the posterior chain and overall leg development. So to keep it short and keep it simple, every athlete can benefit with high bar squats. Typically with the low bar squat, powerlifters will benefit best. That wraps up our video on high bar versus low bar squats. The main difference is the bar position, and then you're gonna see little mechanical differences trickle down from there. If you want to read more on these movements and the full analysis of how to perform them, plus some studies that have shown what muscles are targeted most with each, check out our full guide and Google BarBend and high bar versus low bar.